Hej och välkomna till Judisk kultur i Sverige online. Jag heter Daniel Sandström och är förläggare och litterär chef på Albert Bonniers förlag i Stockholm. Och idag ska ni träffa Philippe Sands. Philippe är författare och advokat och känd för boken Vägen till Nürnberg som kom ut för några år sedan. Och nu är han aktuell med en uppföljare som på svenska kommer att heta Råttlinjen när den kommer ut i september, men som på engelska heter The Rat Line. Och vi kommer att prata om den, men också om situationen nu i London under coronaepidemin. Mycket nöje.
So, hello, Philippe. How are you doing?
I'm doing great here in lockdown London, and it's great to see you. We hear that Stockholm is wide open. People are on the streets, people going to restaurants. Sweden is up and ready for business, is what we're told.
Yes, but it's as very often it's not really the truth. I mean, it's even Sweden is in a lockdown. Although the lockdown is less, I would say, fierce than it would be in certain European countries, but it's still a big shift. And don't believe all the words out there. We are also facing this with terror and fear, I would say.
Take care, because it's nasty.
Yes, that's what we feel as well. It's good to see you anyway, and for the Swedish viewers, I might just make it clear from the beginning that we're going to talk, I think, somewhat about the general situation. Then we're going to talk about your upcoming book, The Rat Line, which will be due in Sweden in September. So this is a kind of a taste of what you're going to get when you actually buy the Swedish version of the book, because I have to mention that as the publisher, although it's already out there for an English reading audience. But Philippe, tell me something about the situation in London in general. How do you live at this point?
Well, it's been a really curious month. I've been in lockdown now for 5 weeks. In fact, we decided, my wife and I, we happened to be in France when all this began. We came back a bit earlier. We didn't trust what the British government was saying, so we decided to follow the French rules. And so we have been scrupulously following the French rules. So the only person I've seen for the last 5 weeks in the flesh, so to speak, is my wife and my daughter. She got it. So she was upstairs in the house, locked away for 3 weeks, 19 years old, not so thrilled about that. The only symptoms she had was loss of taste and loss of smell. But she's absolutely fine. Many of her friends have had it also, and they're all absolutely fine.
Yeah.
But there is a sadness also, because a number of people we know plenty of people who have fallen ill, and we do know some people who have sadly passed away.
Yeah.
Older people, but it seems to be a complete lottery, and that's what is so concentrates the mind. But in a certain sense, life goes on. I write every morning for 3 or 4 hours. In the afternoon, time has slowed down, quite a lot of cooking. We are allowed out of the house to go walking on the heath. I go for a 6-kilometer run every day, and lots of movies, lots of TV, lots of Zoom time with friends. It's actually not so bad, you know.
No. Given the situation, I mean, it couldn't be much worse. But do you feel that the situation in England, was it a big shift in the mentality after the Prime Minister also got it and was hospitalized?
I mean, I think it's gone in various phases. I think the first thing that was remarkable is, if you had said to me 6 months ago, the government could, by diktat, determine that everyone shall stay in the house indefinitely, I would have been hard pressed to imagine it. But people have been incredibly rigorous, incredibly careful. And what is most striking is an amazing sense of community. It's been a very divided country with Brexit, and we have lovely things. Every Thursday evening, everyone comes out of their house, stands on the steps of their house or on their balcony. We clap, we bang spoons, we wave to each other. A real sense of community, and it reminds you what's important in life and what's not important. And perhaps out of this, there'll be a sort of a silver lining.
Yeah.
The world we became used to perhaps is not the best of all possible worlds.
Do you feel, as a barrister and a scholar of law, that the legal ramifications of actually changing a state in such a short period of time, that this is I mean, ominous in any way, or do you feel that it's done in a proper manner, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, it's a very complex question. I mean, on the one hand, as I said, coming back to the point that I made earlier, the idea that the state can determine that certain people shall stay in their homes indefinitely or not move from certain places, of course, it has shades of what I often write about. And I have a sort of sense of anxiety, how easy it is for us to fall into line. On the other hand, this is a virus which causes mayhem for groups. And so what you're balancing, if you like, is the well-being of the individual and the well-being of the group. And it's right, and I have supported the government's position to take very stringent measures, but only for a limited period of time. And the concern that I have is not so much right now in the UK, but in other countries. You read about developments in Cambodia, in Hungary, in Turkey, where there are indefinite accretions of power by the government to do all manner of things, and you can see the dangers, and it's going to get more complicated.
Yeah.
So, for example, one of the concerns that many people have now is that how do we escape from the lockdown? And we're not going to have a vaccine next week or next month. So people are beginning to imagine technologies that our mobile phone would become a way of effectively reporting on each and every one of us 24/7, which room we're in, who we're with. The implications of that are pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
I think we need to open that door with tremendous care, that we
Yeah.
don't slip into essentially a totalitarian state. We've seen in other countries, I mean, my friends in places like Taiwan explain how essentially the state now has total control over your telephone and access to every piece of information as to where you are, what time you wake up, what time you go to bed, do you move 10 meters outside of your house, and there are immediate ramifications if you do. So
Yeah.
we need to be very careful, I think.
Yeah. So how, if you would venture a guess that it's not a medical guess, but that is close to medicine in that sense of how long would you perceive that the UK situation will go on then, the lockdown that you're in at the moment?
I think the UK is about 3 or 4 weeks behind France, Italy, and Spain. They have essentially announced they will come out of absolute lockdown around the 4th or the 11th of May. So I suspect Britain will be a week or two after that. But I think coming out of lockdown is not a return to what we had before. There's not going to be large group gatherings for months and months and months. That has all sorts of implications. It means I won't be going to literary festivals in Britain or in France. It means I won't be going to bookshops, I suspect, even groups of 100. It means that I won't be going to football games at the Arsenal. Things will go on behind closed doors. We will learn to do things in different ways. I think my sense is until they have a vaccine, we will have a significant number of restrictions, but somehow we will accommodate ourselves to them, and we will find our way to new working methods, and we will be in the long run fine. But I do think it's a big wake-up call. I do make the connection between what's happened with this and, for example, climate change. If a single virus that kills 1% of the people that it affects has this dramatic impact, what is going to be the impact of the serious consequences of climate change? And I hope that this gives us pause for thought and enhances greater cooperation rather than greater nationalism. But the jury is out.
Yeah. But I think from a personal perspective, I mean, I come from a country where we've had lived a life of peace for more than 200 years. War, famine, terror, all those questions have been questions that we've never really been able to deal with in Sweden. So from my perspective, this is like the biggest thing that have happened to Sweden basically since the Second World War. And for a generation, it's a big change. But this situation that you're in, the lockdown, it also reminded me of the fact that your upcoming book or your new book, The Rat Line, is about somebody who actually spends quite a few years in seclusion. So should we go make that bridge
Sure.
from lockdown to
Sure.
the red line and Otto von Wächter?
Let's do that.
Yes. So
without giving too much away, because I'm looking forward to being in Sweden in a few months, I hope, and we'll be able to talk in much more detail once people have read it.
Yes, and this is I will try to hold my tongue. But if we go back to your previous book, I mean East-West Street, I mean, which I think I can say that for a lot of readers is like hailed like as a modern classic already, is a book that is about bringing people to justice. The criminals of the Second World War, and especially in Ukraine, were brought to justice through Nürnberg trial and the legal ramification that had. Now you have written a book about somebody who is avoiding justice. So could you elaborate on that?
Sure. I mean, the books are connected. Otto Wächter is a character in East-West Street, but a very minor character. And I think the scope of the books is different. I mean, East-West Street tells both a family picture, but it also tells a big political drama. This book is a much narrower book in the sense that it homes in on a single family, and it tells the story of the love between Charlotte and Otto Wächter from the moment they meet in 1929 through the war into his role as a very senior Nazi to the end of the war, at which moment he disappears off the face of the earth into, as you say, a seclusion. He reappears 4.5 years later in the summer of 1949 in a Vatican hospital, and he is dead. And the question is, what happened to him? It's a complicated story to tell, but I had the great benefit of being given by one of their children, Horst Wächter, their entire family archive. So it's a sort of detective story through the documents, through diaries, through letters, but in which the real truth is hidden and everything has to be decoded, interpreted, pieced together, and understood. And of course, right when we get to the end of the story, we arrive at a different virus. And I have to retain the assistance of an expert on viruses and on immunology, who by total coincidence is a professor at the university close to where I live, my own university in the hospital, the Royal Free Hospital. And he's become also my main advisor now on coronavirus. He knows a lot about coronavirus, and we've laughed a lot on the connections between the two. But what I wanted to do was really tell the story of a single family. The heart of it is my desire to understand how could two people, highly intelligent, highly educated, reasonably wealthy people, get involved in the horrors that they got involved in. And that was the interest in it for me. And I think, in a way, also what was of particular interest was the desire to tell one story that is never told from these periods. This was a period in which the men were in control. But behind the scenes, there was a partner, a spouse, a wife, a girlfriend. And I was absolutely fascinated about the role of that person. And in Charlotte Wächter, I think we have an insight to a fairly remarkable individual, dreadful at one level, but also fascinating.
What is it with Charlotte? Because I mean, with Otto Wächter, he is a career Nazi, you could say that, with Austrian heritage, basically. And he is a fascinating character, but we've seen him throughout the books of the Second World War, that there are quite a few Nazis like him in a lot of ways. But whereas Charlotte is, as you say, the mother and the enabler of Nazism on the home front. So what is it with Charlotte that makes her so fascinating?
She's a complex and interesting character. I mean, I first came across her as a mother. So I have access to this story via one of their 6 children, Horst Wächter. And it's very clear that Horst loves his mother and is absolutely protective about her. And so I find that aspect of the relationship fascinating. He gives me all the material, and I am able to trace her entire life. She grows up in a very wealthy family. Her father is a steel magnate. He runs a steel firm. They make a lot of money in the First World War, making armaments, making, you know, trains and shovels and all sorts of things. She's not an intellectual, but she's highly intelligent and highly artistic. At the age of 18, she goes to spend a year living in England, and she falls in love with the English.
Yeah.
She considers to be even more nationalistic than the Germans and the Austrian, and this is something she admires. She goes back to Vienna, and she studies with Josef Hoffmann and the Wiener Werkstätte, and becomes a designer of textile fabrics, quite successful. And then she meets Otto Wächter, and she gets sucked in to the really seriously upper echelons of the Nazi party, and she's a true believer. She's an anti-Semite, she's a Nazi, she stands with Hitler on the on the balcony of the Hofburg on the Heldenplatz on the 15th of March, 1938. But even more remarkably, she records all of her experiences, not only contemporaneously in her diaries, but then 40 years later, she writes up her reminiscences. And even better than that, she decides to go and find those people who are still alive from that wonderful, glorious period, and to interview them about her husband and what he did and how great he was. This is in the 70s and the 80s, and she keeps the tapes, and I've got the tapes.
Yeah.
So it is a beyond extraordinary account of a lady who was a Nazi in the 1930s, a Nazi in the 1940s, and as her daughter-in-law said, a Nazi for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
Unabashed, unashamed, but who at the same time did remarkable things.
Yeah.
When Wächter disappears in May 1945, she saves his life. She looks after him in his isolation, in his total seclusion, where he hides high in the mountains. And but for her support every 2 or 3 weeks and the extraordinary journeys she made, he would not have survived. And so I'm torn in this way between horror at this individual, Charlotte Wächter, but also a degree of respect at the human level for what she did in bringing up her children in difficult circumstances, but also what she did for saving the man that she loved. But I have to say, she is dreadful. And I try in the writing of it not to impose that view on the reader and leave the reader to form their own view.
As in the previous book, I mean, you do connect with the children of these Nazi criminals, which I think is a correct term. And in this book, it's Horst. In the previous book, it was Horst Frank, who and his child Nicholas, who was the main character. And so how did you go about to engage with the children in this book with Horst in particular?
Well, I mean, the relationship with Horst came through the son of Hans Frank.
Yeah.
One day, I mean, I'd met Nicholas Frank, and readers of East West Street will know that Nicholas has an abiding hatred of his father. Nicholas said to me one day, but you know, Philippe, they're not all like me. All of us children of senior Nazis, we're sort of in touch with each other. We all know each other. Would you like to meet the son of the gouverneur of Krakow and Lemberg, since you're interested in Lemberg? And I say yes, and Nicholas makes the introduction, and I don't know what to meet. And Nicholas says to me of Horst, you know, he's different from me. He loves his father. He thinks he's a good man, but you will like him. And here is the complexity. I do like Horst.
Yeah.
He's been very generous with me. I don't like some of his views. I don't agree with some of his interpretations, but I have to give him very big credit for doing something that very few people would do, for which he's paid a big price with his own family, which is to make available to me the entirety, more or less, of his mother and father's private papers. And that was a project that took 4 years to really go through. But I thank him for that. It happened in strange circumstances. We made a film together, me, Nicholas, and Horst. And at a certain point while we were filming, Nicholas described Horst as a new Nazi, which I don't think he's a Nazi. And in fact, Nicholas retracted that view subsequently. Horst saw that and didn't like it and said to me, what can I do to prove that I'm not a Nazi? And I said, well, you don't have to prove you're not a Nazi. I don't think you're a Nazi. He said, yeah, but I want to show that I'm not a Nazi. So I said, well, what about giving all of those documents that I haven't seen? Give them to a museum. And he said, well, which museum? And I said, well, the Holocaust Museum in Washington will be absolutely perfect because they'll look after them properly. They'll digitize them. They'll make them available. And he said, that's a fantastic idea. Would you like a set also? And that was how it began. And it took a long time because the material is all in German and it required a team of researchers to go through it. It's very time consuming, but very, very fascinating.
And after you've gotten as far in the book as a reader, where Otto Wächter has left his position. I mean, he's on the run. He's a fugitive in the mountains. Then he, as you say, he goes to Rome, and at that point, the book also takes another turn, you might say, and it ends up much more as a, I would say, a spy novel in a way, because at this point in Europe, there are new alliances are being forged after the Second World War. The Soviets and the US are no longer on the same side, and so forth. And you actually employ your neighbor and friend John le Carré, David Cromwell, to help you with to unravel the situation that he finds himself in post-war Rome. Could you tell us something about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's very good talk about this with you because you obviously, I'm thrilled to be edited by you in Sweden and to be with Bonnier, and you have such attention to detail. I really appreciate this. You've come to understand that my writing projects take unexpected turns. I start with a blank sheet of paper. I start writing. I follow my instincts. I open a door. I find myself in a place. There are then 3 more doors. I don't choose which door I'm going to go into. I go into all of them and follow things as far as I can possibly go. And this led me into a place I knew nothing about. It led me into the Cold War. You know a thing or two about the Cold War in Sweden. I found myself in Rome with Otto Wächter in the spring and summer of 1949. He's on the run. He wants to get to South America. He knows that the path to South America is a thing called the Rat Line, which the Nazis are going on, helped by a number of people in the Vatican. So we have, remarkably, we have his 1949 diaries. So he records every person he meets, every person he talks to, but he doesn't give their identities because he's protecting himself. And that's what took so long. That's what took 3 years.
Yeah.
He had to decode the identities of every person he writes about in his diaries and in his letters. And what we uncovered, and I don't want to give away too much, is that things are not quite what they seem. There are very strange alliances between Nazis and Americans and fascists and some people in the Vatican. And as you know, I have the great fortune of having as one of my neighbors the writer John le Carré. I know nothing about espionage, but he does. So I thought to myself, well, I'll go and see him. Interestingly, the book's just come out in Britain, and one of the reviews, which was a very nice review, nevertheless said, it's a shame about Sands's name dropping about his neighbors. I mean, I thought that was a bit harsh because I was very honest. I owned up that I know nothing about the Cold War. I knew nothing about espionage, but I happen to have a neighbor who really knows about it.
Yeah.
So I go and see him. I could have anonymized him, I suppose, but I didn't. I go and see him. And the first thing he says to me is, I was there in 1949.
Yeah.
And I say to him, what do you mean you were there? He said, I was an 18-year-old soldier. I was in Austria, and I was interrogating Nazis. and I was interrogating Nazis to work out which ones we should imprison, which ones we should liberate, and which ones we should recruit. And as he described it, it was very confusing, because until then he'd been told that the Nazis were the worst people on earth. And all of a sudden, as he puts it, he was being asked to turn on a sixpence and work with the people who were the enemy against the new enemy, the Soviets.
Yeah.
So the last part of the book takes us into this totally unexpected place. And it was a mystery to me. It was a big surprise.
And we shouldn't go any further into those secrets, because I think it's at that point you have the reader really at the edge of their seats. But there is one thing that I need to just look into slightly more carefully. It's you end up with another family at the end of the book, an American family. I wouldn't say as much. And so you end up actually finding stuff about people who will, information about their parents during the war that will, in one way or two, dramatically change their lives. Yeah. So tell me how you reason regarding all those things, how all the information that you know suddenly about people's families, how to address that to the people who are unknowingly within your story.
I mean, you've understood. I think it's actually a personal problem that I have. Once I come across a character who is interesting, I can't let go. I have to go all the way to the end. So again, without giving too much away, what happens is I come across a spy ring in Italy centered around Rome. And I come across the American boss of the spy ring. And it emerges, I won't give away too much, that possibly this American spy, who then becomes very famous and works with Lyndon Johnson and others in the CIA, may have fathered a child in Rome, which he left behind and which he had not told his family about. So I tracked down this spy master's existing family in Albuquerque, New Mexico, the scene of one of my favorite TV series, Breaking Bad. And I fly to Albuquerque to confront, if you like, the son of the spy master with the story that I have uncovered. And again, I'm not going to give away too much, but here I find myself in a moral situation that poses a dilemma. Who am I to tell a man in his 70s that he may or may not have another brother in Europe, left behind by his very Catholic father? Now, I could have left that story out of the book. I mean, I think it cuts both ways. And one of the, again, very generous reviews says perhaps a few less rabbit holes in the story would have been good. But my call on it was that many readers actually like strange human interest stories. And so I kept it in. I don't know if I was right. I don't know if I was wrong. But it fills out the story of the world of the 1940s, which I am interested in. And of course, what it does is it opens the door to the next story, because effectively this will be a trilogy. And it takes us into the next book, which will be very far away now from Lviv, but into the world of Pinochet and Chile and the Americans in South America. All of which is completely connected to what happens in Rome in 1949. So in a sense, it's what we all know in our own lives. Things are strangely interconnected. You open a door, you find yourself in a space, and before you know it, you've opened up these connections to other worlds. And I think that's what I'm fascinated about, together with the legacy across the generations. Again, I don't want to give away too much, but out of the blue, right at the end of the writing, another member of the family emerges who gets in touch with me with a position that completely surprises me.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it is those unexpected points of detail that fascinate.
Yes, and it truly, I'm so pleased that you did not leave that story or these stories out of the book, because I do think that they are part of making the book so unique, and because it doesn't really resemble anything else you've read in that sense. I mean, it is a detective story on so many levels. But the main connection is that you find these connections and make them happen, which is kind of a trick of magic at one part.
Well, I did not expect.
We shouldn't say anything. I think our time is running out.
Okay.
We'll just say for our Swedish readers that the book will be out in September, Råttlinjen, and people will have to wait and listen to more at that point, either digitally or in some other fashion. We'll see.
In person, I hope. In person, I hope.
We hope so, and hope is good at this point. Thank you so much for talking to us, and thank you everybody at the Judisk Kultur i Stockholm for listening to this podcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Judisk Kultur in Stockholm.
Tack för att ni har tittat på Judisk kultur i Sverige online. Information om kommande program hittar ni på www.judiskkultur.se. Jag heter Daniel Sandström och tackar så mycket för att ni har tittat på den här intervjun med Philippe Sands. Ha det fint. Stay safe.